Welcome to the Christian Concepts channel, where we present the Sunday school lesson each week when we use the standard lesson commentary. This week, our lesson focus is in the Old Testament book of Zephaniah, chapter 3, verses 14 through 20, and the title is Renewed in God's Love. I'm your host, Dr. Christie Solomon. So we try to present a map for you so that you can have an idea of what geographical area this lesson context is centered. And we share with you this map where you see Jerusalem and other nations that have been involved in Jerusalem's history. You may see Egypt located to the south and Greece to the west, with Assyria and Babylonia in the north, which is where our focus is today about Babylon. But you also probably have noticed that you see the city of Ammon, Moab, and Edom, who have been tremendously a part of the Jewish history as well. This map shows the position of Babylon, who had not captured Jerusalem at this point of Zephaniah's ministry. Here are the features of this lesson that we'll be discussing today. One, we've already shared with you a map at the time of Zephaniah's ministry. There are 3 lesson goals for you to achieve. The lesson outline is divided into 2 sections. There is a plaque that shares just the facts, the who, what, when, where, why of it all. Then we're going to give you some information on who is Zephaniah. There are 7 lesson scriptures for today's study with a bit of commentary, and then there are 4 lessons that you should be able to learn from studying your lesson today, and even the 3 chapters of this book of Zephaniah. We've also included a word cloud for you. Here are the 3 lesson goals. 1, you should be able to identify a reason for joy. 2, we hope that you will be able to contrast a reason for joy with a reason for sorrow. And then 3, why don't you go ahead and sing a hymn or a praise song that correlates to today's lesson. Again, our lesson is divided into 2 sections for your outline. Section 1, praises to the Lord, and it covers verses 14 through 17. Part A, calls to sing, shared in verse 14. Verse 15, we recognize the causes for their rejoicing. And then verses 16 through 17, the confidences that were expressed. Section 2 of our outline is entitled Promises of the Lord, and it covers verses 18 through 20. A is covered in verse 18, the comfort for the sorrowful, and in verse 19a portion, condemning the oppressors is what we read, and verse 19b as well as 20, we read about the confirming the restoration. As we shared that we were going to cover just the facts, the who, what, when of it all. Well, who is this lesson about? It is about Zephaniah, prophet Zephaniah, and the people of Judah or Jerusalem. What's going on? What's going on is Zephaniah has given the people a prophecy from the Lord. When is this taking place? Biblical history shares that it was probably around the time of his ministry, which is recorded between 640 and 620 BC, when King Josiah's reforms start to be implemented. Where is this being taken place? In Jerusalem and the nearby areas. And then why? Well, God wanted to shake the people out of their complacency and have a desire to return back to Him, our God. Now let's learn a little bit about Zephaniah. Who is Zephaniah? Well, his name means the Lord hides, and his genealogy can be traced back 4 generations to King Hezekiah, who reigned between 715 and 680s BC, and making him the only prophet that descended from royal blood, and that's mentioned in Zephaniah chapter 1, verse 1. He is the last of the pre exile prophets. The other prophets were ministering to them while they were in exile or during the time that they returned. So Zephaniah prophesied during the southern kingdom reign that included King Josiah from 640 to 609 BC. And more likely than not, he preached prior to and had an influence on King Josiah's reforms that took place in the 600 BCs as well. Two of Zephaniah's contemporaries are Prophet Jeremiah and Habakkuk. For some scriptural context, we recommend that you go to 2 Kings chapters 22 to 23 and include also 2 Chronicles chapters 34 and 35, and you'll get more of a fuller story of what's going on for the people there. And we've included 3 references that you might want to include in your biblical repertoire of resources. One is the MacArthur Bible Commentary by John MacArthur. The other is the Ryrie Study Bible by Charles Caldwell Ryrie. And then the commentary, Old Testament, entitled Be Concerned, that is specifically on the Minor Prophets by Warren Worshey. Our study is covering Zephaniah chapter 3, verses 14 through 20. And you should know by now that this is the prophetic word of the Lord. He is one of the minor prophets who spoke on God's behalf for what may be happening or what promises God intended to give his people. We will be using the New American Standard Bible verses that are pretty close to the NIV versions. Verse 14, shout for joy, O daughter of Zion. Shout in triumph, O Israel. Rejoice and exult with all your heart, O daughter of Jerusalem. And for your understanding here, daughter, Zion, Israel, and Jerusalem are all names and terms that seem to refer to the remnant regarding their future rejoicing. Verse 15, the Lord has taken away his judgments against you. He has cleared away your enemies. The King of Israel, the Lord, is in your midst. You will fear disaster no more. Well, here are 4 reasons to rejoice according to Zephaniah. 1, God will have taken away their punishment. 2, God will defeat their enemy Babylon. 3, God will dwell in their midst. And 4, there would be no more reason to fear. Verse 16, in that day it will be said to Jerusalem, do not be afraid, O Zion. Do not let your hands fall limp. This verse encourages the remnant not to hesitate about moving forward, but be confident in the blessing of God's release and then get busy doing the Lord's work. Verse 17, the Lord your God is in your midst, a victorious warrior. He will exult over you with joy. He will be quiet in his love. He will rejoice over you with shouts of joy. Well, the cycle of joy will be complete as God's people celebrate their restored relationship with God as their victorious King. Verse 18, I will gather those who grieve about the appointed feast. They came from you, O Zion. The reproach of exile is a burden on them. Well, here the prophet Zephaniah acknowledges the process of mourning for the people, but he states that God will lift that burden from them when he restores their relationship. Verse 19, behold, I am going to deal at that time with all your oppressors. I will save the lame and gather the outcast, and I will turn their shame into praise and renown in all the earth. At that time, that phrase refers to their future, when healing, freedom, and the return home will be how God shows his ultimate and divine love. And verse 20, at that time I will bring you in, even at that time when I gather you together. Indeed, I will give you renown and praise among all the peoples of the earth when I restore your fortunes before your eyes, says the Lord. At that time links to the promises, the future promises of this prophecy of renewed relationships and rediscovered identities. And here are the 4 lessons from Zephaniah that I'm hoping you've learned. 1, that God used the Babylonians to bring severe judgment on Judah and many other nations for their sins. 2, humbly seeking God provides hope for protection from harm. 3, the destruction of other nations would one day be to Israel's advantage. And then 4, God will purify Gentiles and Jews and grant them magnificent blessings after his judgment is complete. And of course, there's other lessons you may have learned, but through this study, maybe those are the 4 that are standing out to you. We've included a word cloud with terms from the book of Zephaniah. Go ahead and take a couple of minutes and look at these words and see what impact they are having on you as you've gone through your study with Zephaniah chapter 3 or even the first 2 chapters. Use this other minute to reflect on the activities and the behaviors of the people according to Zephaniah's prophecy. So, in conclusion, let's consider this an irony of prophecy. Fulfilled prophecy is partly intended to validate a prophet and his or her message. In the Bible, however, quite often the original recipients of a prophecy did not live to see the fulfillment. That is the situation with the prophecies in today's lesson. The original recipients of this message lived in the time of Josiah, and that's shared in chapter 1, verse 1. He was slain in battle about 609 BC. The destruction of the temple did not take place until 586 BC, and then the return from exile, it really did not begin until 538 BC. So the people who first heard this prophecy did not understand the significance of what was being promised by God. Later, the people who were actually in captivity in Babylon, they did understand. And they are described as weeping when they remembered their homeland Zion. Again, Zion is another name for Jerusalem. So the return of the captives from Babylon was a rare event in history. What happened to them was noticed by other nations. Almost 50,000 people, is recorded, were so sincere in their faith that they made this 4-month trip back to the land of Canaan that God had promised to their forefathers, and that was Moses. And of course, now it is called Jerusalem. The people who returned were never seriously tempted again by idolatry. The Babylonian captivity was not pleasant, but it did have positive and long-lasting results. People finally learned that God meant what he had said in the first of the 10 commandments, "You shall have no other gods before me." And of course, that's listed in Exodus chapter 20, verse 3. So today's study is therefore a lesson about hope. Do you see that, my brother and my sister? And this hope is backed by the assurance of God himself through the prophecy. May I remind you, my brother and sister, that Jesus promised that he also would come again, and he added that the time is unknown, and he shared that in Matthew chapter 26, verse 36. Matthew chapter 24, verse 36. And almost 2,000 years have passed since Jesus made those statements. He then added that the important thing is to be ready. And what we know without any question, with most certainty, that God keeps his word. We thank you for studying with us in our Sunday school lesson each week. If you like us, give us a thumbs up. Share this video with your friends and your family. Possibly consider leaving a comment and or subscribing. And until we study with you again, may the peace and the promises of God meet you and your family at your door, enveloped with his love. And until then, I'm Dr. Christie, your host.